The garage was silent, except for the soft hum of the prototype's electric motor. Daniel Crest stood frozen, his hand still gripping the car door handle, as Laura's voice echoed from the speakers with crystal clarity. He had no doubt. The plan was perfect. On launch day, everything would be ours. The recording continued, each word falling like stones into still water. Daniel's 44-year-old face, weathered by grief and hardened by years of corporate battles, cracked with something he hadn't felt in years: complete vulnerability. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows of the garage doorway, 8-year-old Emma Stone clutched a small electronic device. Her light brown eyes, wide with fear and heartbreak, reflected the blue glow of the signal detector in her small hands. She had been standing there for 3 minutes, watching the man who had reluctantly become her guardian discover what she had tried to tell him for weeks. Why is an 8-year-old the only one who sees the truth? The question hung in the air like morning mist, heavy with implications neither of them fully understood yet. Daniel's rational mind, the same mind that had built an electric car empire from nothing, struggled to process the betrayal. Laura Byrne, his personal assistant, his confidant, the woman he had slowly begun to trust with not just his business, but his wounded heart. Her voice was confessing to corporate espionage with the cold efficiency of a surgeon's blade. Emma took a tentative step forward, her small sneakers barely making a sound on the concrete floor. The signal detector in her hand beeped softly, a sound Daniel had dismissed as electronic nonsense just days ago. Now, that same device had led them to this moment of terrible clarity. "Mr. Daniel?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, fragile as spun glass. "I tried to tell you." Daniel turned, and for the first time since bringing her home from the orphanage 6 months ago, he truly saw her. Not as a charitable obligation or a reminder of his wife's unfulfilled dreams of motherhood, but as a small person who had been trying to protect him when no one else would. The recording continued to play, Laura's voice detailing security codes, prototype specifications, and launch dates with the precision of someone who had been planning this betrayal for months. Each revelation was another crack in the foundation of Daniel's carefully constructed world. 6 months earlier, the Willowbrook Children's Home had smelled of antiseptic and hope. Emma Stone had been standing in the hallway, her small suitcase packed with everything she owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback book, and a small music box that played a lullaby her birth mother had given her. Daniel Crest had arrived wearing a dark suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, his presence filling the modest waiting room like a storm cloud. He wasn't there because he wanted to be a father. He was there because his wife Sarah had made him promise, in those final precious moments before the car accident took her away, that he would love someone who needs it most. The adoption caseworker, Mrs. Henderson, had tried to prepare Emma for what she was about to encounter. "Mr. Crest lost his wife recently," she had explained gently. "He's a good man, but he's hurting. Give him time." Emma had nodded, understanding hurt better than most 8-year-olds should. She had been abandoned before, not once, but 3 times. Each placement had started with promises and ended with disappointment. But something about Daniel's sad eyes had made her want to try again. The car ride to his house had been silent, except for the soft hum of the electric engine. Daniel had glanced at her twice in the rearview mirror, both times looking away quickly when their eyes met. Emma had pressed her face against the window, watching the city give way to rolling hills and eventually to the kind of house she had only seen in magazines. "This is home," Daniel had said when they pulled into the circular driveway. But his voice had carried no warmth, only the weight of obligation. The house was beautiful, too beautiful. Every surface gleamed. Every piece of furniture looked like it had never been sat on. Emma had followed Daniel through rooms that felt more like a museum than a home, her small hand trailing along walls that seemed to whisper of loneliness. "Mrs. Patterson will take care of you," Daniel had said, introducing her to the nanny he had hired. "I travel frequently for work. She'll make sure you have everything you need." Everything except what she needed most, Emma had thought. But she had learned not to say such things out loud. That first night, lying in a bed bigger than her entire space at the orphanage, Emma had listened to the sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear the soft murmur of a television, the occasional clink of glass on glass. Daniel was awake too, she realized. Both of them alone in their separate rooms, grieving different losses. Laura Byrne had arrived in their lives like a gentle summer rain after a long drought. She was everything Emma wasn't, tall where Emma was small, confident where Emma was hesitant, smooth where Emma was rough around the edges. Most importantly, she had a gift that Emma had never possessed. She could make Daniel smile. "Good morning, sunshine," Laura would say to Emma each morning, her voice like honey over warm bread. She brought little gifts, hair ribbons, books, a small stuffed elephant that Emma clutched at night. To Daniel, she brought organization, efficiency, and slowly, carefully, the possibility of joy again. Emma watched from the corners of rooms as Laura transformed their sterile house into something that felt almost like a home. She arranged flowers in vases, played soft music during dinner, and most remarkably, she made Daniel laugh. The sound was rusty at first, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years, but it grew stronger with each passing day. "She's good for him," Mrs. Patterson had whispered to Emma one afternoon as they watched Laura and Daniel reviewing business documents in the study. "And she's good for you too. Look how much happier you've been." It was true. Emma had been happier. For the first time since the adoption, she had felt like maybe, just maybe, they could become a real family. Laura included her in conversations, asked about her day at school, and listened, really listened, when Emma talked about her dreams of becoming a scientist like the women she read about in her library books. But children who have been abandoned learn to watch for cracks in foundations. They develop an instinct for detecting when love might be conditional, when kindness might have an expiration date. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something about Laura's perfection was too perfect, too carefully constructed. It started with small things. The way Laura's smile flickered when she thought no one was looking. The phone calls she took in hushed tones, always stepping outside or into another room. The way she asked detailed questions about Daniel's work. Questions that seemed to go beyond normal curiosity or even romantic interest. "She's just trying to understand your world," Mrs. Patterson had explained when Emma mentioned her observations. "That's what people do when they care about someone." But Emma had lived in foster homes where people pretended to care. She had learned to distinguish between genuine interest and calculated manipulation. Laura's questions felt like the latter, though Emma couldn't yet articulate why. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday evening in March. Emma had been reading in the living room when she heard Laura on the phone in the kitchen, her voice lower than usual. "The prototypes are almost ready," Laura had said. "He trusts me completely now. By launch day, we'll have everything we need." Emma had frozen, her book forgotten in her lap. Launch day. That was what Daniel called the date when his company would unveil their new self-driving electric car technology. It was months away, but Daniel had been working toward it for years. "Who was that?" Emma had asked when Laura returned to the living room. "Just work stuff, sweetie," Laura had replied, but her smile hadn't reached her eyes. "You know how boring grown-up business can be." Emma had nodded, but something cold had settled in her stomach. She began to pay closer attention to Laura's conversations, her comings and goings, the way she touched Daniel's arm when she asked about his work. The signal detector had been a birthday gift from Daniel, the first and only present he had given Emma personally. It was a small device designed to detect electronic interference, the kind of thing that might appeal to a child interested in science. Daniel had presented it awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the gesture. "I thought, since you like figuring out how things work," he had said, not meeting her eyes. "It's not much, but it's perfect," Emma had whispered, and for a moment, she had seen something soft flicker across his face. She had been experimenting with the device for weeks, learning how it responded to different electronic signatures around the house. The microwave made it beep in short bursts. The Wi-Fi router created a steady hum. The security system generated a complex pattern of signals that fascinated her. But it was the car that had given her the strangest readings. Emma had been playing in the garage one afternoon, using the signal detector to map the electronic systems in Daniel's prototype electric car. She loved the garage. It was the only place in the house that felt genuinely lived in, where Daniel's passion for his work was evident in every blueprint pinned to the walls, every tool carefully arranged on the workbench. The detector had been giving normal readings until she had crawled under the driver's seat to see how the car's computer systems were wired. That's when she had heard it, a faint, almost musical beeping that didn't match any of the car's known electronic signatures. Emma had followed the sound, her small body easily fitting into spaces an adult couldn't reach. The beeping grew stronger near the seat's base, where she discovered something that made her blood turn cold. A small device, no bigger than a coin, carefully hidden where only someone specifically looking for it would find it. It was clearly not part of the car's original design. The device was sleek, professional-looking, with a small LED that pulsed in rhythm with the signal detector's warnings. Emma had seen enough spy movies to know what it was, a listening device, a bug, a way for someone to hear everything that happened in Daniel's car. Her first instinct had been to run to Daniel immediately, to show him what she had found. But something had made her pause. If she was wrong, if this was somehow supposed to be there, Daniel would be angry. He had little patience for what he called her overactive imagination. Instead, Emma had decided to investigate further. She began paying attention to when the device was most active, correlating its signals with Laura's presence in the house. The pattern that emerged made her stomach sick with understanding. The device was most active when Daniel was in the car alone, especially when he was making phone calls about work. And it was always active when Laura was nearby, as if she was somehow triggering it to record. Emma had started keeping a journal, documenting every strange coincidence, every suspicious behavior, every moment when Laura's perfect facade seemed to slip. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was building into something that scared her. The hardest part was the isolation. Who could she tell? Mrs. Patterson would think she was being dramatic. Daniel would dismiss her concerns as childish fantasy. And Laura was becoming more central to their lives every day, more trusted, more beloved. Emma felt like she was watching a slow-motion disaster unfold, powerless to stop it. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in April. Emma had been monitoring the hidden device for weeks, and that night, it had been more active than ever. Daniel had been working late in his study, taking calls about the upcoming launch, discussing security protocols and proprietary technology with his engineering team. The rain drummed against the windows with increasing intensity, creating a soundtrack of urgency that matched Emma's growing anxiety. She had positioned herself in the hallway outside Daniel's study, using her signal detector to confirm that the device was recording everything. Through the partially open door, Emma could hear Daniel's voice as he discussed the most sensitive aspects of his company's technology. He was explaining the breakthrough algorithms that would allow their cars to navigate complex traffic situations, the security protocols that would protect the systems from hacking, the manufacturing processes that would give them a competitive advantage. Every word was being captured by Laura's listening device and transmitted to unknown recipients. Emma watched the signal detector's display, seeing the peaks and valleys of electronic activity that corresponded to Daniel's conversation. The LED pulsed frantically, and through the detector's audio output, she could hear fragments of Daniel's conversation being transmitted to an unknown receiver. Emma had used her journal to document this pattern of surveillance over several weeks, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the activity was more intense, more urgent. She had overheard Laura making arrangements for what she called final extraction, and Emma had realized with growing horror that whatever Laura was planning, it was reaching its climax. She couldn't wait any longer. Armed with her journal of observations and the signal detector as proof, Emma had knocked on Daniel's study door. "Mr. Daniel, I need to tell you something important." He had looked up from his papers, his face already showing the irritation that came whenever she interrupted his work. Daniel's study was his sanctuary, the place where he could focus on his technology without the complications of human emotion. Emma's presence, there was an unwelcome reminder of his domestic responsibilities. "Emma, it's late. Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow." "No, It can't, Emma had said, her voice trembling but determined. Someone is listening to everything you say in your car. I found a microphone, a bug. It's hidden under the driver's seat, and I think Laura put it there. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's face had gone through several expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally, anger. But not the kind of anger Emma had expected. This wasn't anger at Laura or at the situation. This was anger at Emma for disturbing his carefully constructed world with what he saw as childish fantasies. "Emma, that's enough," he had said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I understand that adjusting to a new family is difficult, but making up stories about Laura is not acceptable." Emma had felt her heart sink. She had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed what she would say, had gathered evidence to support her claims. But she hadn't prepared for the look of complete dismissal on Daniel's face, the way he was already turning back to his work as if she hadn't spoken. "I'm not making it up," Emma had protested, holding up the signal detector. "Look, I can prove it. This device shows when electronics are transmitting signals, and the car has something that shouldn't be there. I've been monitoring it for weeks. I have dates, times, patterns." Daniel had glanced at the detector with the same expression he might give a child's broken toy. "That's a simple interference detector, Emma. It picks up signals from all kinds of sources. You're seeing patterns that don't exist." "But I heard her on the phone," Emma had pressed on, desperation creeping into her voice. She was talking about prototypes and launch day and having everything they need. She asked you questions about security and technology that go way beyond normal curiosity. "She's not who you think she is." Daniel had stood up then, his full height making him seem impossibly tall and distant. The man who had once seemed merely sad and withdrawn now loomed over her like a figure of judgment, his grief-hardened features set in lines of absolute rejection. "Laura is the only person who has brought any joy back into this house since Sarah died," he had said, his voice growing colder with each word. "She has been nothing but kind to both of us, and she certainly doesn't deserve to be accused of whatever this is." Emma had felt each word like a physical blow. She could see the finality in Daniel's expression, the way his mind had already closed against her warnings. He had made his choice, and it wasn't her. "She's patient with your questions, Emma. She includes you in conversations. She's trying to build a relationship with you. And this is how you repay her kindness? By inventing conspiracy theories and trying to destroy the first happiness I've felt in over a year." The words hung in the air between them like a wall of ice. Emma had seen the look on Daniel's face, the same look she had gotten from every adult who had ever decided she was too much trouble, too damaged, too difficult to love. "I'm trying to protect you," she had whispered, tears starting to fall. "I'm trying to help. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. The best way you can help is by giving Laura the respect she deserves," Daniel had said coldly. "She's going to be part of this family, Emma. She's going to be my wife. You need to accept that." The word wife had hit Emma like a physical blow. She had known that Daniel and Laura's relationship was growing serious, but hearing it stated so definitively, so finally, made her realize that she was running out of time. Once Laura became Daniel's wife, once she had legal access to his assets and complete access to his trust, Emma's warnings would be meaningless. "You're not listening to me," Emma had said, her voice breaking. "You never listen to me. You don't want to hear anything that might complicate your life or make you uncomfortable. You adopted me because your wife made you promise, but you never wanted a daughter. You wanted a charity case that would stay quiet and grateful and never ask for anything real." Daniel's face had gone white, then red. "That's not true. I'm providing for you. I'm giving you a home, an education, opportunities, but not love," Emma had interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Not attention, not trust, not the belief that maybe, just maybe, I might be telling the truth about something important." Daniel had stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, guilt, and finally, a kind of exhausted resignation. "I don't know how to do this, Emma. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to love a child who isn't your real daughter," Emma had finished for him. "Who isn't Sarah's daughter. Who isn't the child you and Sarah would have had together if she had lived? The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Daniel had looked at Emma as if seeing her clearly for the first time, and what he saw was apparently too much for him to bear. "Go to your room," he had said finally. "We'll talk about this tomorrow, when you've had time to think about what you've said." Emma had run from the room then, her small body shaking with sobs. She had thrown herself onto her bed, burying her face in the stuffed elephant Laura had given her. And for the first time since the adoption, she had allowed herself to feel the full weight of her abandonment. Not just by her birth parents or the foster families who had given up on her, but by the one person she had dared to hope might be different. Daniel had chosen Laura over her, chosen the woman who was betraying him over the child who was trying to save him. But as Emma lay there in the darkness, listening to the rain against her window and the sound of Daniel's voice as he called Laura to apologize for Emma's outburst, she made a decision that would change everything. If Daniel wouldn't listen to her words, she would have to find another way to show him the truth. She would have to become not just a witness to Laura's betrayal, but a guardian angel working in the shadows to protect the man who couldn't protect himself. Emma had gotten up from her bed and gone to her desk, where she opened her journal and began writing. Not just observations this time, but a plan, a strategy for gathering irrefutable evidence that would force Daniel to see what was right in front of him. She was 8 years old, heartbroken and dismissed, but she wasn't giving up. She had finally found something worth fighting for, and she was going to fight for it, even if it meant going to war with the woman who had stolen her father's heart. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the world clean, and Emma worked by the light of her desk lamp, planning her next move in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the survival of the only family she had ever known. Emma had become a different child in the weeks following Daniel's rejection of her warnings. Where once she had been open and hopeful, now she was careful and calculating. She moved through the house like a small ghost, observing everything, documenting everything, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. The transformation was both heartbreaking and remarkable. Emma had learned to sublimate her need for love and attention into a laser focus on gathering evidence. She had become a detective, a spy, a guardian angel working in the shadows to protect the man who had broken her heart. She had learned to be invisible when Laura was around, to become part of the furniture so effectively that the adults forgot she was there. This skill, learned in foster homes where being noticed often meant being moved, now served her well as she gathered evidence of Laura's systematic betrayal. Emma had developed a sophisticated system for monitoring Laura's activities. She learned Laura's schedule better than Laura knew it herself, positioning herself at strategic points throughout the house where she could observe without being seen. She memorized the sounds of Laura's footsteps, the rhythm of her speech patterns, the subtle changes in her behavior that indicated when she was being deceptive. Laura had become bolder in her deceptions, perhaps believing that Daniel's dismissal of Emma's accusations meant she was completely safe. She took more phone calls, asked more detailed questions about the company's security systems, and began staying later in the evenings, often remaining in the house after Daniel had gone to bed. Emma had used this time to her advantage. She had discovered that Laura often worked on Daniel's computer in the study, supposedly organizing his schedule and handling his correspondence. But Emma had noticed that Laura spent far more time in the technical files than any personal assistant would need to, and she always closed the computer quickly when someone approached. Using the signal detector, Emma had learned that Laura carried her own electronic device, something small and sophisticated that she kept hidden in her purse. Emma had experimented with the detector until she could identify the device's unique signature, a complex pattern of electronic pulses that was most active when Laura was alone with Daniel's computer. Through patient observation, Emma had realized that Laura's device was some kind of data transfer tool, capable of copying files and sending them to remote locations. The technology was far more sophisticated than anything a typical personal assistant would have access to, suggesting that Laura was working with people who had significant resources and technical expertise. The breakthrough had come on a Tuesday night in May. Emma had been pretending to sleep when she heard Laura moving around downstairs long after Daniel had gone to bed. The sound of careful footsteps, the soft closing of doors, the subtle electronic beeps that indicated computers being activated, all of these had become part of Emma's vocabulary of surveillance. Creeping to the top of the stairs, Emma had watched as Laura let herself into the study and powered on Daniel's computer. The blue glow of the screen illuminated Laura's face, revealing an expression of cold concentration that Emma had never seen before. This wasn't the warm, caring woman who made breakfast and asked about homework. This was someone else entirely, a professional carrying out a mission with ruthless efficiency. For over an hour, Laura had worked methodically through Daniel's files, copying documents, transferring data, and making phone calls in whispered tones. Emma had been too far away to hear the conversations clearly, but she had been able to record them using a small tape recorder she had borrowed from the school library. Emma had positioned herself at the top of the stairs, lying flat against the floor, so she could see through the banister spindles without being visible from below. She had learned to control her breathing, to remain absolutely still for long periods, to become a shadow that observed without being observed. The next morning, Emma had listened to the recording, her heart sinking as she heard Laura's voice discussing proprietary technology, security weaknesses, and launch timelines with someone who was clearly not on Daniel's team. "The self-driving algorithms are even better than we thought," Laura had said, her voice carrying the cold satisfaction of someone who had successfully completed a difficult task. "Once we have the complete code, we can have our own version on the market 6 months before his launch." Emma had felt sick. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was the systematic destruction of everything Daniel had worked for, carried out by the woman he was falling in love with. Laura wasn't just stealing technology. She was stealing Daniel's future, his dreams, his life's work. But Emma had also realized something else. Laura had made a mistake. In her confidence, she had begun keeping records of her activities on her own phone, probably to report back to her handlers. If Emma could access that phone, she might be able to gather enough evidence to make even Daniel believe. The phone represented the key to everything. Emma had observed Laura's habits carefully, noting when she left the device unattended, when she was distracted, when she might be vulnerable to a determined 8-year-old with nothing left to lose. The opportunity had come during a family dinner the following week. Laura had been especially charming that evening, sharing stories about her childhood, asking Emma about her favorite subjects in school, and making plans for a weekend trip to the Science Museum. "I want us to be a real family," Laura had said, reaching across the table to squeeze Emma's hand. "I know it's been hard, adjusting to all these changes, but I hope you can trust me." Emma had smiled and nodded, playing the role of the grateful, accepting child. But inside, she had been calculating. Laura's purse was sitting on the counter, her phone likely inside, and the adults are distracted by their conversation about wedding plans. Wedding plans. The words had hit Emma like a physical blow. Daniel and Laura were talking about marriage, about making their relationship permanent, about building a future together. And Laura was planning to destroy him. Emma had listened to their conversation with growing horror. They were discussing venues, guest lists, honeymoon destinations, all the details of a life that Laura was planning to abandon as soon as she had what she needed. The casual way Laura discussed their future while simultaneously planning Daniel's destruction was breathtaking in its cruelty. After dinner, while Daniel and Laura were cleaning up, Emma had excused herself to use the bathroom. Instead, she had slipped into the kitchen and quickly accessed Laura's phone. The device wasn't password protected, a mistake that would prove costly. Emma had quickly scrolled through Laura's text messages, her small fingers flying over the screen as she photographed the most damning conversations. Messages to someone named Jay discussing the mark and extraction timelines. Photos of Daniel's computer screen showing proprietary code. Payment confirmations for large sums of money. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Laura wasn't just an opportunistic thief. She was part of a sophisticated operation designed to steal Daniel's technology and destroy his company. The messages revealed months of planning, coordination with multiple parties, and a level of professional criminal activity that went far beyond simple corporate espionage. Emma had returned to the dinner table with her proof, but also with a terrible knowledge. Laura wasn't just stealing from Daniel. She was planning to disappear right after the launch, taking both the technology and Daniel's heart with her. Emma had realized that simply showing Daniel the evidence might not be enough. Laura was skilled at manipulation, and she had months of trust built up. She might find a way to explain away the messages, to make Daniel doubt what he was seeing, to convince him that Emma had somehow fabricated the evidence. Emma needed something more definitive, more immediate. She needed to catch Laura in the act, with her own words as proof, in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. That night, Emma had made final preparations for what she privately called Operation Truth. She had rigged the hidden microphone in Daniel's car to record directly to a USB drive, creating a permanent record of everything Laura said when she thought she was safe. She had also prepared a complete dossier of evidence: photos, recordings, documented timelines, and a detailed written account of everything she had observed. Tomorrow, she would spring her trap. Emma had stayed awake most of the night, going over every detail of her plan, considering every possible outcome. She was 8 years old, preparing to take on a sophisticated criminal operation with nothing but her wits and a child's desperate determination to save the only family she had ever known. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If she failed, Daniel would marry Laura, and Emma would be forced to watch as the woman she had tried to expose destroyed everything they had built together. But if she succeeded, if she could finally make Daniel see the truth, maybe they could still have a chance of becoming a real family. As the sun rose on the morning of the revelation, Emma had felt the weight of her responsibility like a physical burden. She was no longer just a child trying to find her place in the world. She was a guardian angel, preparing to fight for the soul of the man she desperately wanted to call her father. The morning of the revelation dawned gray and drizzly, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Emma had barely slept, her mind running through every detail of her plan. She had one chance to get this right, one opportunity to save Daniel from the woman who was systematically destroying his life. Emma had learned Laura's patterns well enough to predict her movements with mathematical precision. Every Wednesday, Laura arrived early to prepare for the weekly executive meeting, which gave her unsupervised access to Daniel's office and computer. What Daniel didn't know was that these morning sessions were when Laura did her most serious espionage work, when she transmitted stolen data to her handlers and received instructions for the next phase of her operation. Emma had positioned herself in the garage before dawn, using her signal detector to monitor the hidden microphone's activity. The device had become her early warning system, alerting her to Laura's presence and activity levels with the reliability of a sophisticated surveillance system. At precisely 7:15 a.m., as Laura's car pulled into the driveway, the device had sprung to life. Emma had watched through a crack in the garage door as Laura had entered the house, greeted Mrs. Patterson cheerfully, and then made her way to Daniel's study with the purposeful stride of someone who had important work to do. Within minutes, the signal detector was registering intense activity. Laura was making her calls, transferring data, and confirming plans for what Emma now understood was the final phase of her operation. The electronic signatures were more complex than Emma had ever seen, indicating that Laura was using multiple devices simultaneously, coordinating with several different parties. Daniel's launch was scheduled for the following month. After that, Laura would disappear, leaving Daniel with a broken heart and a business devastated by the theft of his life's work. Emma had pieced together enough of Laura's communications to understand that the plan was elegant in its simplicity: steal the technology, destroy the company's competitive advantage, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. Emma had waited until she heard Laura's voice clearly through the modified microphone system she had rigged. The clarity was better than she had hoped. Every word was audible, every inflection preserved. Then, she had activated the recording system and settled in to document the final proof of Laura's betrayal. What she heard made her blood run cold. "Everything is in place," Laura was saying, her voice colder than Emma had ever heard it. I've got the complete algorithm, the security protocols, and the manufacturing specifications. The personal access codes were the hardest part, but Daniel trusts me completely now. A pause, then laughter. Not the warm, gentle laughter Emma had heard at dinner tables, but something sharp and calculating, like the sound of glass breaking. The best part is that he's talking about marriage, Laura continued. He actually thinks I love him. It's almost sad, really. This grieving widower, so desperate for companionship that he can't see what's right in front of him. Emma had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. The cruelty in Laura's voice was like a knife twisting in her chest. This wasn't just professional detachment. This was active malice, the voice of someone who took pleasure in deceiving and destroying others. And the kid, Laura's voice had turned dismissive. She's been suspicious from the beginning, but who's going to believe an 8-year-old with abandonment issues? Daniel barely tolerates her as it is. She's just another reminder of his dead wife's sentimental wishes. The words hit Emma like physical blows. To hear her worst fears confirmed so casually, to understand that Laura had seen through her desperation for love and acceptance and had used it as a weapon. It was almost too much to bear. The extraction is set for next week, Laura continued. By the time they realize what's happened, I'll be on a plane to Switzerland with enough money to retire. The technology will be in production within 6 months, and Daniel's company will be worthless. The recording had continued for another 20 minutes, each revelation more damning than the last. Laura had detailed her extraction plan, her new identity, even the specific account numbers where the money from selling Daniel's technology would be deposited. She had discussed the other companies she had infiltrated, the other lives she had destroyed, as if she were recounting a particularly successful shopping trip. Emma had sat in the garage, tears streaming down her face. As she listened to the woman, she had almost allowed herself to trust reveal the depths of her deception. But through her heartbreak, Emma had felt something else growing, a fierce, protective anger that made her hands shake and her jaw clench. This wasn't just about technology or money. This was about Daniel's faith and love, his willingness to trust again after Sarah's death, his fragile hope that he might be able to build something beautiful from the ruins of his grief. Laura was stealing all of that, taking not just his work, but his capacity for joy, his belief in human goodness. Daniel might not love her the way she desperately wanted him to, but he didn't deserve this. No one deserved this level of betrayal from someone they trusted. As Laura's call ended, Emma had carefully saved the recording to multiple devices, then prepared for the most difficult part of her plan. She had to time this perfectly to make sure Daniel heard the truth in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. Emma had waited until she heard Laura's footsteps heading toward the garage. Part of her morning routine was to check Daniel's car for any overnight security alerts. This was Emma's moment. She had quickly placed the USB drive containing the recording in the car's audio system, set to play automatically when the ignition was turned on. Then she had hidden herself behind the workbench, signal detector in hand, waiting for the confrontation that would change everything. The minutes had stretched like hours. Emma had counted her heartbeats, controlled her breathing, and rehearsed what she would say when Daniel finally heard the truth. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was here, she felt the weight of everything that depended on the next few minutes. Daniel had arrived home earlier than usual, tired from a night flight back from a business meeting. Emma had watched him walk into the garage, his mind clearly elsewhere, and climb into his car for what he thought would be a routine check of the vehicle systems. The recording had started immediately. Emma had watched Daniel's face transform as he heard Laura's voice, cold and calculating, discussing his destruction with the casual efficiency of someone planning a grocery list. She had seen the exact moment when understanding dawned, when the man who prided himself on his rational thinking realized he had been played by a master manipulator. The silence that followed the end of the recording was deafening. Daniel had sat in the car for several minutes, his head in his hands, his whole body shaking with the magnitude of his betrayal. Emma had watched him process the information, seen him relive every moment of their relationship through the lens of this new knowledge. Everything made sense now. Laura's questions, her access to his files, her perfect timing, her uncanny ability to know exactly what he needed to hear. She had been playing him from the beginning, using his grief and loneliness as weapons against him. That's when Emma had stepped out from behind the workbench, her signal detector still beeping softly in her hands. "I try to tell you," she had whispered, her voice breaking. "I try to warn you." Daniel had looked up then, and Emma had seen something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not dismissal, not irritation, but recognition. For the first time since she had come to live with him, Daniel was truly seeing her. "Emma," he had said, his voice hoarse with emotion. I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of all the times he had dismissed her, all the moments when he had chosen Laura's word over hers, all the occasions when he had made her feel like her voice didn't matter. Emma had waited for this moment for so long, had dreamed of Daniel finally understanding that she had been trying to protect him. But now that it was here, she felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for all the time they had lost, all the pain they had both endured because he hadn't been willing to listen. The confrontation with Laura had been swift and terrible. Daniel had called her into the garage, his face a mask of controlled fury that Emma had never seen before. The transformation in him was remarkable. The grieving widower who had been easily manipulated was gone, replaced by the steel-hard businessman who had built an empire from nothing. Laura had entered with her usual bright smile, already chattering about the day's schedule and the upcoming launch preparations. She had been in the middle of suggesting menu changes for the launch party when Daniel had held up a hand to stop her. "I need you to listen to something," Daniel had said, his voice deadly quiet. Laura's smile had faltered as he played the recording, her face going pale as her own words filled the garage. Emma had watched from the doorway, her heart hammering in her chest, as Laura's carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time. It was fascinating and horrible to witness. Laura's face had gone through a series of rapid changes: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally, a cold resignation that revealed the predator beneath the caring mask. Emma had seen the exact moment when Laura realized that her deception had been discovered, when she stopped trying to maintain her false identity and allowed her true nature to surface. "Daniel, I can't explain," Laura had started, but her voice had already changed. The warm, honey-sweet tone was gone, replaced by something sharp and professional. "Explain what? How you've been stealing from me for months. How you've been planning to destroy my company. How you've been laughing at my grief while pretending to love me." Laura had tried several different approaches: denial, justification, even an attempt at seduction, but Daniel had been immune to all of them. The recording was damning, and they both knew it. More importantly, Daniel had finally seen Laura clearly, without the filter of his own desperate need for companionship. "You used my dead wife's memory against me," Daniel had said, his voice breaking slightly. "You knew exactly what Sarah meant to me, and you used that knowledge to make me vulnerable." Emma had watched Laura's face harden as she realized that her emotional manipulation was no longer working. The woman who had brought flowers and made breakfast and asked about homework was revealing herself to be something else entirely. A professional criminal who had studied Daniel's weaknesses and exploited them with ruthless precision. "Business is business," Laura had replied, and Emma had seen the exact moment when her mask finally fell away completely. "You're naive if you think love has anything to do with corporate success. I did what I had to do." The casual cruelty of it took Emma's breath away. Laura was talking about the destruction of their family, the theft of Daniel's life's work, the betrayal of his trust, as if it were nothing more than a business transaction. There was no remorse, no shame, no recognition of the human cost of her actions. "And Emma?" Daniel had asked, his voice getting stronger. "What about Emma? She's just a child, and you were willing to destroy her sense of security, her trust in adults, just to get to me." Laura had laughed then, a sound like breaking glass. "That little girl has been nothing but trouble from the beginning. She's damaged goods, Daniel. I actually did you a favor by showing you how paranoid and unstable she is." Emma had felt the words hit her like physical blows, but she had also felt something else, Daniel's anger flaring hotter than she had ever seen it. For the first time since she had known him, Daniel was truly angry on her behalf, defending her against someone who had hurt her. "Get out," he had said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get out of my house, get out of my life, and if you ever come near Emma again, I'll make sure you regret it." Laura had straightened then, her transformation complete. The woman who had pretended to love them was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating and utterly without conscience. "You think you've won something," Laura had said, her voice dripping with contempt. "But you're still the same broken man who couldn't save his wife. You're still the same emotional cripple who can't connect with anyone. I may have failed in my mission, but I've shown you the truth about yourself." She had paused at the garage door, delivering one final, poisonous parting shot. "You'll never love that girl the way you loved your precious Sarah," she had said. "She's just a reminder of everything you've lost, and eventually, you'll get tired of pretending otherwise." The silence that followed Laura's departure had been profound. Daniel had stood in the garage for several minutes, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Emma had wanted to comfort him, but she hadn't known how. The man who had been her guardian for months was suddenly revealed as someone she had never really known, someone capable of depths of feeling she had never suspected. Finally, Daniel had turned to her, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Emma," he had said, "I owe you an apology. A big one." Emma had nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She had waited so long for this moment, had dreamed of Daniel finally acknowledging that she had been right. But now that it was here, she felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for all the time they had lost. "You were trying to protect me," Daniel had continued. "You saw what I was too blind to see, and instead of listening to you, I made you feel like you were the problem. That was wrong of me. That was unforgivable." "It's okay," Emma had whispered, but Daniel had shaken his head. "No, it's not okay. You're 8 years old, Emma. You should be worried about homework and friends and whether you're going to get a good part in the school play. You shouldn't have to be the adult in this house, protecting me from my own stupidity." The words had hit Emma like a wave of validation. Finally, someone understood the burden she had been carrying, the responsibility she had taken on despite her age and inexperience. "I was scared," she had admitted. "I was scared she would make you send me away." Daniel had knelt down then, bringing himself to her eye level. "Emma, look at me. I'm never going to send you away. Never. You're my daughter now, and that means we're a team. Partners. And partners listen to each other." He had paused, seeming to gather his courage for what he said next. "I know I haven't been a good father to you. I've been so wrapped up in my own grief that I forgot you were grieving too. You lost your whole world when you came here, and instead of helping you feel welcome, I made you feel like a burden." Emma had felt tears starting to fall then, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time since coming to live with Daniel, she had felt truly heard, truly seen, truly valued. "I was never supposed to be Sarah's replacement," Emma had said quietly. "I was supposed to be Emma. Just Emma." Daniel had nodded, his own tears falling freely now. "Just Emma. And Emma is exactly who I need in my life." Emma had thrown her arms around Daniel then, holding him tight as 6 months of loneliness and fear finally found their release. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel had felt like he might be able to build something good from the ruins of his old life. They had held each other in the garage, surrounded by the tools and technology that had once been Daniel's only passion, and discovered that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from forgetting the past, but from learning to build a future that honors both loss and love. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood at a podium in front of a room full of reporters, investors, and industry analysts. The launch event for his revolutionary self-driving car technology had been scheduled for this day, but Daniel had a different announcement to make. Emma sat in the front row, wearing a new dress that Daniel had let her pick out herself, a deep blue that matched her eyes and reflected her growing confidence. She had chosen the color carefully, she had explained to Daniel, because blue represented trust and loyalty, qualities that had become precious to both of them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice carrying clearly through the conference room, "I called this press conference to discuss security, trust, and the future of corporate responsibility in the technology industry. He had spent the past 3 weeks working with law enforcement, cybersecurity experts, and his own legal team to unravel the full extent of Laura's corporate espionage. The investigation had revealed a sophisticated network of industrial theft that went far beyond his own company, involving multiple corporations and millions of dollars in stolen intellectual property. 3 weeks ago, my company was the target of a coordinated attack designed to steal our most valuable intellectual property, Daniel continued. The attack was not carried out by foreign agents or sophisticated hackers. It was carried out by someone I trusted, someone I welcomed into my home and my life. The room was silent, reporters leaning forward as Daniel detailed the methods Laura had used, the information she had stolen, and the network of corporate spies she had been working with. Emma watched as Daniel transformed from the grieving widower she had known into someone stronger, more purposeful, more committed to truth and justice. But this story isn't really about corporate espionage, Daniel said, his voice growing stronger. It's about the importance of listening to the people who care about us most, even when their voices are small. He had looked directly at Emma then, and she had smiled at him with the kind of radiant joy that could light up a room. The gesture was small, but it represented everything they had fought for: recognition, respect, and a knowledge that their bond was real and unshakable. My daughter Emma discovered this threat months before I did. She tried to warn me, to protect me, and I dismissed her concerns because I thought I knew better. Because I thought a child couldn't possibly understand the complexities of adult relationships and business dealings. Daniel had paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Emma could see the reporters taking notes, could feel the shift in the room's energy as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. I was wrong. Emma saw clearly what I was too blind to see. She had the courage to keep investigating even when I refused to listen. She had the wisdom to document everything, to build a case that would be impossible to deny. And she had the love to keep trying to save me even when I hurt her feelings and made her feel unheard. The reporters had been scribbling frantically, but Daniel had barely noticed. His focus was entirely on Emma, on the small person who had saved not just his company, but his capacity to trust and love again. Going forward, my company will be implementing new security protocols, new transparency measures, and new ways of incorporating diverse perspectives into our decision-making process. We will be creating a position for a chief security consultant, and I am pleased to announce that the first person to hold this position will be my daughter Emma. Emma had beamed at him, her signal detector visible in her lap, where she had been fidgeting with it throughout the conference. The device that had once been just a birthday gift had become a symbol of their partnership, a reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected sources. Because sometimes, Daniel had concluded, the most important truths come from the smallest voices. And sometimes the greatest act of love is simply choosing to listen. The press conference had made national news, not just for the corporate espionage angle, but for the story of a father and daughter who had found each other through adversity. Emma had become something of a celebrity, the 8-year-old who had saved her father's company, but she had handled the attention with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through her investigation. 6 months later, Emma and Daniel sat together in the garage, working side by side on the newest version of their car's security system. The space had been transformed from a sterile workshop into something that felt genuinely collaborative. Emma's drawings and diagrams were pinned next to Daniel's engineering blueprints, and a small workbench had been added at just the right height for her to use comfortably. "What do you think about this circuit?" Daniel asked, showing Emma a complex diagram on his tablet. "Too complicated, or just complicated enough?" Emma studied the design with the serious concentration of someone whose opinion was genuinely valued. "It's good," she said finally. "But what if someone tries to bypass it here?" She pointed to a section of the diagram that Daniel hadn't considered. "You're right," Daniel said, making a note. "We'll need to add an additional layer of protection there." "Good catch." Emma glowed with pride, but it was a different kind of pride than she had felt during the press conference. This was the quiet satisfaction of being part of something, of contributing to a partnership that valued her unique perspective. "Mr. Daniel," Emma said, using the title that had evolved from formal address to affectionate nickname. "Are you happy now?" Daniel looked up from his work, considering the question seriously. "You know what, Emma? I think I am. Not the same kind of happy I was before, but a different kind. A growing kind." Emma nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Her own happiness was different too, more cautious than the wild hope she had felt in the early days of the adoption, but also more solid, more trustworthy. "I think Mom Sarah would be proud of us," Emma said quietly. She had started referring to Daniel's late wife as Mom Sarah a few months ago, and Daniel had never corrected her. If anything, he seemed to find comfort in the way Emma had woven Sarah's memory into their new family structure. "I think she would too," Daniel agreed. "She always said that families aren't just about blood, they're about choice. About choosing to love each other, even when it's hard." Emma looked around the garage, at the evidence of their partnership, at the life they had built together from the ruins of their separate griefs. "I choose you," she said simply. "Every day, I choose you." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I choose you too, Emma. Every day for the rest of my life." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside the garage, a father and daughter continued their work, their voices mixing with the soft hum of electronics and the gentle beeping of Emma's signal detector. No longer a tool for uncovering deception, but a reminder of the truth that had brought them together. Sometimes justice begins with a small voice speaking truth to power. Sometimes healing begins with the courage to listen. And sometimes the most profound love stories are the ones that teach us to choose each other again and again until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. Emma's story reminds us that the bravest thing we can do is keep telling the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. And sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we build from broken pieces and stubborn hope. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters, that truth has power, and that love is always worth fighting for. Subscribe for more stories about the courage to speak up, the strength to listen, and the miracle of second chances. Because every child deserves to be heard, and every adult deserves the chance to choose love over fear.